Starting 3, 2, 1. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Semantic Kernel Public Community Office Hours. As always, I always have to emphasize it's a public forum. So, feel free to hop off mute or raise your hand or, share what you're working on, what you're doing. Just know that, it's done so in a public space. So we welcome everyone or anyone to contribute, and we certainly would love to hear from you. We actually have a decently packed agenda today, but as always, right, we're very flexible in how we do things. So if you have a burning question that you want to have answered, well, just leave it in the chat or raise your hand, and we can certainly, call on you or direct some attention to what you want to bring up. So in terms of announcements or some new things, we actually have some new blogs, or one new blog out, and it's a guest blog. It's from Anthony. And actually, Anthony, I believe you're on the call. So if you want to hop off mute to kind of share what you did, what you wrote, I'm sure the community would love to hear about it.
Yeah, so this one was actually just a hobby project of mine. I think we've all kind of realized interacting with any single one of these language models, whether it be OpenAI or Claude, or Anthropic's Claude, or anything like that, they're pretty generic and pretty blanket. If you try to generate content from some of these LLMs, like it's pretty obvious it was generated. It wasn't written by a human. So this was kind of an attempt to see, using out of the box methodologies, what you could kind of do in terms of giving this model a persona. Obviously, there's temperature and things like that, but that wasn't geared towards persona generation in my mind. That was more just randomizing the outputs. This is more, being able to figure out which words should we prioritize. So if you want to go down the stylometry route, or the part of speech tagging. Some people use he, she, they, those words kind of more often than not. Some people use punctuation more often than not. So this is kind of an attempt at showing how you can modify the logit bias values of those tokens and get it to output something that's similar to your desired persona. It's definitely not perfect. You'd have to fine tune a model for that, but not everyone has the resources to do that. So yeah, nice little fun hobby projects. Hopefully people find it insightful.
Anthony, I'm curious, like what type of personas are you looking to build, or did you try to experiment when you were tinkering with these parameters and whatnot?
More so chatbots, less so like actual content generation. I think chatbots are a huge use case for this stuff right now, like customer support and things like that. If you can randomize kind of logit bias values that some chatbots have, you could essentially randomize what quote unquote persona that a user gets connected to and stuff like that. So every time you contact customer support, it's not this generic robot you're talking to. It gives them more of a human feel to it.
Nice. Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Anthony, for putting this together. And as always, right, if anyone in the community wants to share what they're doing and to even publish it on our dev blog, be more than happy to have you to spotlight your work and just contribute back to the community. So again, thanks, Anthony, and looking forward to more. All right. In terms of other new things, this was actually more from last week's office hours. We actually had two great things to call out. One was the updates to the Chat Copilot sample and incorporating semantic memory, upgrading semantic memory into it. And Chris Rickman did a good deep dive into all those different things, all the different new features that are enabled inside Chat Copilot. So definitely check that out if you missed it last week. And the other one was, in my opinion, a very cool demo from Fabian Williams. He's a senior product manager for the Microsoft Graph team, and he was showing like how could you use semantic kernel to using natural language to be able to inquire and see the updates to the Microsoft Graph. So definitely encourage you all to check those out if you haven't already. All right, so with that, again, if you have any sort of burning questions that you want to ask, or even you want to continue some of the conversations that some of these pre-submitted questions are highlighting, then just raise your hand. We'll certainly call on you. All right, so our very first question comes from Eric. Eric asks about, okay, so he calls out, there are several documents for querying over, which currently include PDFs, text, images. How can Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and especially Excel be added to documents? And I think added to, I believe this is just referencing the Chat Copilot sample, of which, right, today out of the box, it does support several document types. But I believe Eric is asking, okay, how do we add more to it? So first off, Tao on the side left his comment saying that Word is supported by Semantic Memory and can be added to Chat Copilot. So definitely enable that, or dig into the code to see where you can find that. The second question that Eric's asking is probably more interesting and worth discussing is, are the issues concerning the slowdown of chat after incorporating the memory pipeline being addressed? So I guess, I also would like to know what is the slowdown that's being experienced. I don't know if Chris or anyone else on the call can speak to what this could potentially mean. I don't know. Chris, do you have any?
Yeah. Oh, is Devis on the call?
If Devis is on the call, yes.
I'll let him speak to it first if he wants. Otherwise. I mean, I think ultimately the main shift from the perspective of the Chat Copilot application, prior to semantic memory, the processing of the document happened as part of the post request. And so at the time where you're getting a response from that post request, the document is chunked and in the index. With semantic memory, it gets queued, and that queuing could naturally introduce some additional delay. The one thing that I think could help with that is on our radar, we just haven't pivoted to it, is improving the UX experience so you can clearly see, oh, this has been imported and it's queued and then now it's processed. Which I think would help with that visibility. I mean, with any queuing system, I mean, imagine if there's a lot of users in the queue. I mean, there's the size of the document, but if there's the time it takes to be on the queue, so it depends on various usage patterns. In terms of, I think Devis can speak to any performance considerations, but I mean, you can also load documents outside of the application through the command line. Say that if you were setting up a chat for a particular use, that can be done outside of the application where performance, that type of duration becomes less of an issue.
Yeah, I'd be curious if anyone on the call has also, as your, it doesn't have to even be semantic memory, but if you're using just memory overall inside your kind of chatbot setting, chatbot scenario, like, are you experiencing also sort of slowdown? Like, is the retrieval step like very heavy? process? And how do you deal with the situation when you have hundreds, thousands of users all using your same thing? So if anyone has anything, please feel free. Raise your hand. Monitoring chat to see. Okay. Well, this is a good question. Again, if there are like more concrete things that Eric or anyone wants to dive into, please file a GitHub issue. I think it's a good forum to discuss these things more at length. And obviously Discord if you just want broader community to see the question. Okay, Eric's third question or point is about, like, I guess it does Chat Copilot support authentication using other providers such as Okta? Well, I would just say that out of the box, no, but there's nothing stopping you from adding whatever authentication provider you want. It's just view it as a extension that you could do. So short answer to that. But and again, remember the Chat Copilot isn't a product; it is a sample, right? To just illustrate how does semantic kernel look like, or what does a application, end-to-end application using semantic kernel look like?
Yeah, Gina just did some work, I think, about 30 days ago. It landed roughly 2 sprints around our auth story for Chat Copilot, specifically with the goal to give people the options to choose non-Azure authentication providers. So there should be some flexibility there.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. Good to know. Cool. All right. Looking at chat. Yes, if you want to, if anyone on the call, wants to, like Anthony's calling out, if you want to write PRs to add additional documents or data types that are currently supported, but you would like to be supported out of the box, well, feel free. And the Semantic Memory repo is open to contributions. So feel free to submit something. So I guess while we're on the topic of Chat Copilot, I see Amit actually added several questions. Amit, do you want to come off mute to just share
Yeah,
what these
sure.
are so we can
Yeah,
talk
sure.
about it?
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so I work on the ISD side of Microsoft, and we're engaging with a customer right now where there's a heavy interest in Copilot ChatGPT. So we've deployed the IP toolkit. We can see how it all kind of runs, but then we've come across some questions we'd like to ask, because we can see within the code the document size limit is set to 1 megabyte. And obviously we can see we can change that, but what we wanted to understand is if we did change that limit, is there any impact to the tool, or was that kind of just set as a default based on it just being a sample product?
Yeah, that's Chris speaking. I'm curious where that default is. I was looking a little bit ahead of time, I think, and in the app settings, the default config for, and this controls the these settings
Document
are for
upload.
the document upload, which looks like it's roughly allowing 4 megabyte, kind of rounded down, and with 10 files in parallel. I mean, just because for post limitations, we don't want people to post 1,000 files or whatever. I mean, I'm not sure what the source of these numbers were, but these are the settings I'm familiar with. I'd be curious where in code you found the 1 megabyte default. It might be overridden by this config. I'd like to chase that down a little bit.
Sure, I can find out, unless I know that Danny's on this call. Maybe Danny, if you know exactly where that file limit is.
I mean, once the
I can
documents
find
are
out otherwise.
processed and in the index, I mean, to address your performance thing, I mean, it's all just, I mean, the most impactful aspect of the performance is just the basic I/O of transferring the document, from the app to the blob store, and then kind of the background processing time. Once it's in the index, performance should scale.
Okay. So there's no harm in us there's no kind of hard limit, like changing that isn't going to cause any kind of impact to the tool.
No, other than maybe degrading the user experience because now they're given the ability to like upload way too much data or something. There is the command, I mean, but that's a judgment call, of course. There is a command line tool where you can load the index in the Chat Copilot repo. I'll link it, document import, and you can choose either to import to associate the document with the chat, which is kind of the experience you get when you import through the UI, or into the global space, which all chats can access. Just to call that out.
Okay, no, that's helpful. The other question was around when we do upload documents, are these private to the user in terms of no one else can see them and kind of see what other people have uploaded?
That's a great question. There's the link to the import tool. Right, yeah. So for the way Chat Copilot is designed, in fact, it's just setting up for this. Where'd it go? Shoot. I'll try and do this when I'm talking. So basically, when you import the document, they're affinitized to a particular chat session. So each chat session you see has like an identifier, and then the documents are part of that chat session. And because Copilot Chat has like this multi-user chat concept, then any user that has access to that chat would then have access to that document or whatever's associated. I mean, I think Devis in the documentation has a story around, you could, so let me get this screenshot here. But basically in semantic memory, there's this concept of tags. And I think Devis, when he presented to the semantic memory, addressed this, that so for the tags, the way we're using them, one of the tags is chat ID, and then we store the ID in there, and that's how. I got the screenshot here. Just 1 sec. And that's how we, effectively quote unquote partition the index for a chat session. So here's a screenshot of a record in Azure Cognitive Search, but you can see the schema. And so, and the bottom, there's chat ID and then a memory tag. And then in the payload is the actual snippet and some other metadata. And so you could choose, I mean, you could say, oh, we have a tag that's the user ID, and then you could associate, particular documents or memories or whatever with the user. But at the index level, it's not like in a SQL database where you're giving user permission only to access a certain data. And then if you have like a bug in your application logic, the storage is still going to say, oh no, error, you can't access it. Here, it's 100% application logic. So if we mishandle this ID for the tag, it's possible with an application logic bug, data from one chat or one user could bleed through another. There's no underlying, mechanism at the storage level, the index level. Now, if you created different indexes with different permissions at the Azure level, you could kind of deal with that. But at that point, you start to introduce the need to fan out, which is a performance killer across indexes. I mean, if different users means different tenants, then that would imply the data is in different subscriptions. So I think it's all very situational.
Yeah, it would be a single tenant. It will be one organization. It will just be the users within it kind of accessing it and uploading documents where it could be a scenario where it's an individual uploading document and then a group of individuals, and it was just that understanding of the borders and security around it.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically application logic at this point. I mean, if the scenario is that the user wants to upload documents and never share that with anybody else, then that could be isolated to a single container or index, and then there'd never be any bleed through as long as you were connecting to the appropriate container index for that user, which again is effectively application logic.
And I guess that's quite straightforward to implement from a containerization perspective. It's just a single containers for each user. Yeah.
Just come up with some naming scheme. In fact, for Chat Copilot, we used to do that where there's a different index for each chat session. It would be some prefix with the GUID or something like that. But there were some negative side effects because then you start to get to some maximum index limitation. So everything's very situational in terms of.
So I think that answers the third bullet point there on the scenario to an extent where we can then separate the logic of individual kind of requests and then having a group kind of request.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now that's been really helpful, Chris. So I work for Microsoft as well, Chris. So if we did have any other questions, would I be able to ping you in the week and just have a chat if needed?
Absolutely. I'm always here, and I can always loop in Devis or somebody if it gets to that level.
Amazing. No, that'd be really appreciated. I know there's a couple of my colleagues on the call, so if anyone does have any other questions, feel free to ask.
I see Linkai have hand up.
Hey, thanks, Alex, and thanks, Chris. So yeah, it's a great opportunity, because I've been looking at the Chat Copilot source code for a while, and initially I was trying to figure out what exactly features or outstanding features it's trying to demonstrate. So when I look at it, of course, semantic kernel is one, and it uses steps like a stepwise planner, which is great, and then the memory. So aside from that, what are the features that I should pay attention to that like it's outstanding or differentiated from other product? That's one question. The second question is, well, the reason I look into is I think this is a great tool or starting point to drive customer AI application integration. Because one use case, it's probably quite typical that in the large organizations, the customer service reps, they have their internal tools, a lot of tools. They have like hundreds of tools, and it's very hard for customer reps to know which tool to use, or some like command line based, and then they spend a lot of time to build the UI to integrate this to make it easier. But still you need the trainings, because even though you know where the tool is, but what is it and how to use that particular tool is a big issue. So if we can integrate this chat UI style, the UI style is a chat that in the back end can tie into different data source or memory. So you basically chat with SQL Server, right? Because all their data is related to some kind of data store. So you chat with SQL Server, you generate SQL statements and executes it, or you whatever data sources, and then that would allow you user to select. So the enterprise application dev team can sort of build plugins or component and say the user say, oh, I'm chatting against this user's this data source. And that's one thing. The other thing is, since you're dealing with different data sources, the prompt that you would like to use would be specific for maximize the result. So on the UI side, it would be also great to let people or the developers develop specific prompts, so then the user can say, oh, I want this kind of prompt. Well, you don't need to have display the whole prompt text, but you can have a description, right? Say the prompt is something that the people can look at the description and they understand what it is. So instead of just the generic, if you do just the chat or whatever you type in is the command or the prompt, but you want to sort of assisted prompt in this, plus on top of the user input. So these are the things that I'm looking at, and then I would like to say, hey, we can do this, and go to customer and say, hey, we have a starting point. Look at this, and we can add these to it for your use. And hopefully they'll cause some excitement for them.
Yeah, no, this is really good. Link Kai, if anything, you probably just gave an entire like year's worth of roadmap items for a product to build. So thank you for doing our
thank
work
you
for
for that.
us. No, but in seriousness, like, so yeah, your very first question was kind of around, you called out planner or planning and some of these other features of the semantic kernel, and how does it compare to other frameworks? Like, honestly, from my point of view, like the ideas actually like that are expressed in these different frameworks are quite similar. And more frameworks will come out. But from our side, right? Well, one, we have a very deliberate choice in architecture for what we want to include in the kernel versus what we leave that to the developer to introduce as additional plugins, additional complexity. And you'll see that actually with this like push to v 1.0. And if you're following along that, you'll see actually more stuff is actually being stripped out from the kernel than put in. So it is a deliberate choice to make sure the kernel itself is just very lightweight, and it should be really just treated like a runtime, right? And you're adding the plugins, you're adding the functions, connectors, and all that to make that runtime better, or be able to do more interesting things. Planning is for sure a key component of it. Memory, as expressed through semantic memory, is another one. And there'll be more, right? Especially, right, Anthony was sharing off like personas earlier, or personas / like agents. I think very interesting direction to go down, especially if you want AI to do more of these things autonomously, like for you. So all that's to say is that it all fits within our pattern, our paradigm that we're introducing with the kernel. And in terms of like all these other, like if you're talking with a customer, if you're the customer yourself, right, and you're trying to build these things, we'll definitely take a look at examples like Chat Copilot to see what is possible, how to stitch these things together, and then also, right, view it as you like in an enterprise, there will be so many different connectors, so many different things to hook into, of which you probably already have a lot of this code written, and then to bring that into the kernel should be a very like easy like step, kind of like decorate it, or so if you're using like plugins, right, use a common schema like the Open API type schema, so that you can just very easily hook those things into your application. So that's a very short answer or short reply to like the great things that you called out, Link Kai. And if anything, please give us more of that sort of feedback. Write up GitHub issues that if there's things that are missing that would be super important to include. But the team right now is very focused on just delivering this 1.0 experience, so that we can here, I'll just call it out in the blog post. Right, at least for .NET and soon to be Python and Java as well, right? Just trying to get to a stable, right, release. So anyway, hope that's helpful.
Would it be good to sort of make a feature request to those things that I was looking for?
Yeah, you always can. And the GitHub issues is a good place to, like, for us to debate over what should be included, what shouldn't be included. So yeah, feel free to put that there.
Yeah, one thing was like, I was thinking, say, aside from looking PG to implement, or maybe some individual people can implement on their own and then contribute the code into the community.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that's the questions.
Cool.
It's great.
Well, thank you.
It's great.
Yeah, thank you, Ling Kai. All right. We have more questions. I see some chats coming in, but so that we can go through these questions in time, let's go back to the main programming. All right. So Sophia asks about two things. One is about using. Okay, I deployed my project, and I have some native functions. And by deploying it, I mean I want to know how my clients can have this Copilot in their machines, how to make the subscription be in their Azure account, not charging us. The second is about authentication. Am I plugging now? In my plugin, I wrote manually the login credentials, but I want Copilot to ask for auth before letting the user ask questions. Okay, this sounds very, very like specific implementation of, or how like Chat Copilot does things. I guess Chris or anyone who would maybe know.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is less specific to Copilot Chat and more of a general Azure pattern. Like, how does anybody develop a solution in the Azure marketplace and make it available to other people's subscriptions? That's certainly not something that Chat Copilot. We participate in that ecosystem, but we don't define it, and we're certainly don't drive it. But I believe there is a well-defined pattern that I would definitely target the Azure docs for that in terms of multi-tenant or marketplace provider type stuff. And then
The authentication piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of how that would generally work, again, is I think if we just, again, pivot to common patterns, if there's, if presumably some application, and that application deals with authentication, whether it's a bearer token or whatever it is, and then when the application's orchestrating the interaction with the plugin or whatever, it would coordinate that authentication from the app layer, kind of cascading down, kind of in the traditional way you would for, even for a non-AI type scenario, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So Sophia, I think hopefully, I mean, rewind back to our previous discussions around like authentication and all that. Look at how Semantic Kernel does it. See if it could work for you. I think this idea about having the Copilot to ask for authentication before before users asking questions, I think that's I don't want to call it, that's an implementation detail of how you want to like express that and do that. But again, as Chris mentioned, just follow common patterns to do so. And if you want to dig in deeper, I'm sure people on Discord or people in the community can help you out with that. Okay, Sophie also asked a very basic question around how do you display a logo image from the logo URL in the app settings JSON. I don't have the direct answer here, but probably probably would mean just looking into app settings JSON. Hopefully there's like some path to an image that you could just modify. I would expect, then you could swap that out. But if there's again more issues with this that you're facing, file GitHub issue. Well, the team will look. File it on the Chat Copilot repo, not the Semantic Kernel repo. Okay. So there's a good question from Colin around, I need to split a long document so I can store it in a vector database or summarize it by pieces. The Semantic Kernel has support for topic segmentation. There are no paragraphs. This is a transcript. I like to split it where topics change. I'm thinking something multi-pass where it first breaks it up where sentences end, and the LLM analyzes it and breaks it up better where topics end. In general, does Semantic Kernel have any text splitters the way LangChain has? Even if it does not have topic segmentation, LangChain has the pieces to build a strategy, i.e. concrete and abstract text splitters. Can I find that in SK? If not, are there plans to add that? Okay, so good question. I think this, I like the use case. I think it could be a very common one, especially as you're working with different types of text. Okay, so the first part about do we support like topic segmentation? Not necessarily. I mean, you could write a skill, you write a plugin to do that. Some type of like semantic function that says like, hey, given this piece of text, identify what are the topics for that, right? So that could be one semantic function that you write with a prompt. And then with the output of that, you can, maybe say like, okay, classify the chunks of text that I have as being one of these topics. I'm just live brainstorming here, but maybe that could be like a way to do it. But if you're talking specifically about like, how do you split text based off of like, let's say specific delimiters, right, inside text, then there's some bits of that inside the semantic kernel. I probably would admit that LangChain probably has a few more text splitters than we have, at least out of the box. I think it's a very good question whether, and the people working on the 1.0 release are probably thinking this question of like, do we want to have text splitting as being a core part of the semantic kernel or not? I personally would like to have that because I think it's just a quality of life sort of thing. I think even semantic memory has text splitting utilities as well. So that might be a better home for this type of stuff, because typically, right, when you're doing these splitting or chunking of text, right, it's for the purposes of creating memories or indices inside your vector database or whatnot. So yeah, so that's my quick answer to that. I don't know if anyone else on the call wants to add any more color or a different thought or perspective to this.
I think that's right. I mean, Elmer called out semantic memory too, which, I mean, if you were to anticipate where more feature growth is going to occur in the future, it might be in the semantic memory space more than directly on the kernel. Right now, they're basically at parity.
Yeah, good question. And Anthony says in the chat, a more cost-effective way might be to look back on the embeddings, which you need to compute anyway, and check for anomalies between embedding distances to get a rough estimate of topic changes. I like that. That's a very data sciencey answer to this question. So
the only potential issue with that is if you're partitioning based on like just an individual sentence, it's going to be super noisy. You'd probably have to do embeddings on a large topic space for that to actually work in practice.
Yeah. Chat Copilot, go down the rabbit hole a little bit. We actually had an issue from the customer where it just wasn't getting the right data, and we were grinding up the at like sentence level chunks, and it was just too granular, too fine. It was just not enough semantic content. It's almost like grinding the data into dust. And so, definitely a little bit bigger chunk sizes. I can't agree. give more context for that type of evaluation.
Cool. All right. Next question. Question from Kevin is: I've been experimenting with the Python planners and have a few questions and challenges I'd like to seek some help on. In particular, the sequential planner provides the best results for me, but often will repeat the same step many times. I suspect because of the GPT endpoint latency, but I'm not 100% sure. My other issue is that the other planners never get my contextual parameters correct for future function calls. They just provide the variable reference rather than the actual value. Interesting. Okay, so a couple things here. I don't know if this is Python specific or it's also reflective in C# side, but around the repeating of results, repeating of the steps. Let's see, when I've run planner, I haven't actually run into this issue. I've run into more of the issues of it will hallucinate, like wrong function names or incorrect parameters or things like that. But repeating the same step, that could happen maybe if like your function names maybe are that you're importing to the kernel are very similar to one another. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if anyone else in the call has run into this particular piece. And then anyway, about the section part about the context, and so if it's only seeing this like $ resource ID piece, maybe I'm not sure, other than like the kernel should, like the prompt templating language, right, we use does, take in this like the bracket, the curly brackets, and then the $, whatever the variable name is. And then when you pass that into the prompt, it should resolve, right, whatever that value is. So yeah, again, maybe it's a planner issue, and planner issue being like using a weaker model like GPT-3.5 Turbo. Assuming the code is correct, right? Assuming that the code you wrote for your functions and the functions you're bringing to the kernel is correct, I would consider looking at trying to update to a more powerful model like GPT-4. But yeah, I don't know. Does anyone else on the call have any thoughts here? I see David saying that on the C# side, this issue or these issues may have come up when running the email example. Okay. Yeah, good to know. Hard to see. Hard to say without like actually seeing the code and tracing through it. So. Okay, and I see actually in the chat, Constantine just has a very quick question. Can answer, like, have we looked at some of these projects like GPT for All or Llama Sharp? And I think that the question is really about like how do you use non-OpenAI models, like local models that you can run on your own machine. So yes, semantic kernel. Oh, go ahead.
Llama Sharp already has a semantic kernel connector, actually.
Yeah.
This is really cool.
Yeah. Cool. And for non-Llama Sharp, non-OpenAI, just like for all the other models that you could imagine, there's a few different paths, right? There's a Hugging Face connector as well that you could just spin up a Hugging Face endpoint and just like call that. There's also just the other answer would just be like we expose an interface that you can just implement that whatever model that you want to run locally, you could. Yeah, so definitely check those out. This is again one of those other pieces where like specific model connectors, like let's say OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, the closed source ones and the open source ones, they may be split out into its own thing, and the kernel would be importing or bringing that in as a connector, but not necessarily like directly in the kernel. but we'll see. I mean, that's part of the 1.0 motion that's happening. But yeah, for me personally, I would love to just have more natural, or at least an easy way to use models locally. There's some interesting projects out there, like I was just playing around with this morning, LM Studio, Olama, also, and some of these other ones that just allow you to take something like you know, open source model and just like run it locally. So, Constantine, you have your hand up. You want to add anything or say anything more?
Yeah. So I would like to say really big thank you for your work, because I work a lot of with GPT models and bikes, and I find your beautiful library, and I'm so enjoyed because now I can just use it, and I don't need to implement all this stuff by myself. So thanks a lot, and I hope I'm gonna contribute as much as I can. Yep. But I have also one more question about models. Is there ability to switch models? Because I found sometimes when user just start conversation, it's easy to use, for example, this GPT 3.5 4K, and then I can calculate the size. If I need go like give content, I can switch a different model. Maybe as a result, switch to Chat GPT 4. Is there a kind of option, or I can implement it if it's not exist yet? So you know, maybe this planner can choose right model for right size or right tasks.
Sure. I think I understand the question, and I believe we actually have that. I'm trying to see. Okay, this is kind of the question. But anyway, but the idea is that like kind of you route or have like planner or just the kernel like select the not only the appropriate like prompt or the function that you wrote, but also like the model that's appropriate for the task. I would say, can you do this right now with semantic kernel? Yes, you can instantiate multiple kernels, right? Each one having its specific model backend that's tied to it, and then you write functions specific for that. And then you could maybe use planner or use even just a semantic function to sort of like route between which ones to call. But this problem that you're highlighting, and what Ushi from Discord is also highlighting, I think is actually a very important pattern, especially if we're in this world where you have to orchestrate between these different models. Like, how do you do that effectively? So I'd love to hear.
Doesn't this? I agree with you 100%, Alex. Isn't this partly what some of the agent stuff is addressing?
Yeah, agent sounds reasonable, by the way. Maybe this is a good idea, right?
Yeah. Like, I think the meta approach would be something along the lines of an agent can automatically like write or like spin up its own kernel with its own backend, right? With its own resources, and just like run with it and go forward. That I think could be a very compelling type of like implementation. So if anyone wants to build it, feel free.
I would like to build it,
Yeah, try it. We'd love to see it. I see who has their hand up. I always forget your name, but the JS Uji. I forget your first name, but hand up if you want to come off mute.
Yes, thanks for letting me explain my stuff. So, well, there are two things being discussed, the capability to connect to all kinds of models. There is this app, Ubabuga, which is an open source Gradio app that lets you host pretty much all local models. This is the main purpose of that app is to be able to host everything that's on the leaderboard at the moment. So I made a connector for that. It was part of Semantic Kernel core at some point, but now it's been extracted into that new repo, which I'm currently updating to the new beta version of Semantic Kernel. I think it should be done tonight, actually. And part of this is the first thing is the connector to Babuga, which means the connector to any model you can think of. And the second thing is the actual router to different models that we've been talking about. It's a pretty complex connector that basically checks the capabilities of the multiple models that you might be hosting at the same time. And it asks for ChatGPT to vet them. It samples everything that you ask ChatGPT and then asks ChatGPT to figure out which model can do which functions. And then it will reconfigure itself automatically and choose the right model for the right function. So I believe this is what we've been talking about, and it's pretty much functional.
Yeah, no, this is great. And thank you, John Sylvain, for calling this out. And yeah, it's really cool. I remember seeing this, or remember seeing the demo of this actually not too long ago. But nice to see that more work is happening here. So everyone on the call, definitely check that project out. Cool. In the last couple minutes, I think we can at least go through. Actually, we went through that question. Vincent's asking, I'd like to know the steps of implementing Semantic Kernel on my web app. Default answer, look at Chat Copilot as an example. Vincent, if you have very specific questions about this, again, ask this on our issues, GitHub issues. Okay, we kind of covered this one as well. Okay, this last question from Dave is about, okay, if I have a database guide document, thousands of pages of long, I want to break this up, create embeddings for it on a table-by-table basis, then have a user be able to just ask an assistant about the schema for our less technical users wanting to make reports. But in my example, I'm asking about a particular table and the size of a column. When I execute, the prompt is just recalling the complete wrong table, as you'll see in this example. Actually, I have the notebook here. But let's finish the question. Also, this technique with the recall appears to be just stuffing a prompt with data. Is there anything be available for cognitive search where you could just query the store of the embeddings directly for SK without having to be put in the prompt, like the examples in the Azure Chat Playground? Chris, do you want to answer this second part just really quickly?
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, I'll do the victory lap. I think semantic memory is that. I mean, right now, I mean, if you want to remove the chat history part, semantic memory is what we're using underneath the scenes, which just gives you access to that direct kind of ask API. They have ask versus search, where search is going to give you the raw query results with citation stuff, and the ask is going to try and synthesize a semantic answer.
No, that's good. Yeah, I think we might have to revisit the notebook and the code maybe later. Thank you, Dave, for sending code over. We can definitely take a look. The team can actually just look at this async, and then we can, during next office hours, we can go into more detail of what could possibly be happening here. Cool. I mean, the last part was just have a more open discussion if we had time, which we have 2 minutes left for. So if anyone has any burning questions, any things that they want to quickly cover, or just give us feedback for, now's the time to share it. Go ahead, Constantine.
Yeah, I would like to say super thank you, because I'm again reading whole documentation about your beautiful library, and it's super cool. You explain about prompt engineering so good, and because you also provide a lot of examples how to build properly prompts. It's super helpful because I spent millions of tokens to stop model doing some garbage, So again, thanks a lot. And I'm personally a C# developer. And there's a lot of libraries like long chain, whatever many million libraries for Python, but almost zero libraries for C#. And I think especially because of OpenAI for Azure, C# it's a most coolest language for doing all the stuff, and especially because we can do integration with vector databases, so I can use any kind of database, and because of this library, I can build really whatever I want. So again, thanks a lot. I'm super happy that I found this library, and again, thanks a lot that you spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to build this beautiful product. Yeah, and I hope we can make it even better.
Well, thank you. I mean, I guess that's the best way to end this call is with that. So yes, thank you, Konstantin. And it's not just a library, right? It's as
It's
Chris
whole
calls out,
ecosystem, you know.
it's
all the
a
stuff.
community, it's an ecosystem, it's all that. Daniel's asking about prompt flow. Actually, for a teaser for next week, I believe I'm gonna try to bring in the prompt flow people to give a more comprehensive like walkthrough and demo of how semantic kernel and prompt flow can come together. So there's that, plus actually some cool demos around OpenAI function calling that, yeah, you'll just have to come next week to see. So, but yes, anyway, thank you everybody for joining the call, and this will be recorded, published on YouTube. So if you missed it, or if your colleagues would like to see this, feel free to forward it to them. All right, take care.
Thank
See you next time.
you, guys.
Thanks.